you can go down your own rabbit holes and research this fascinating case on your own too. There are many layers to this, as there are many layers to the Kennedy assassination, to Marilyn Monroe's death, to Dorothy Kilgallen's death. Are they all interconnected? Here's just Dorothy Kilgallen's story. And again, there are tons of YouTube videos about this. I'll link one in the comment section too. To a lecture of a person who wrote a book about Dorothy Kilgallen called The Reporter Who Knew Too Much. He gave a lecture about the case at a library. You can check that out. There may also be a movie coming up about this case, which I think would be fantastic. It's long overdue. So, let's get right into this. Some backstory about Dorothy, should you not know who she is. I'm guessing a lot of you probably don't. I have always been into old movies and classic Hollywood, and I didn't know who she was until a few months ago. I'll talk about that later in a roundabout way I came to learn about her. But some backstory: she was born on July 3rd, 1913, in Chicago to Irish Catholic parents. Her father was a reporter, and the family moved around a lot until they settled in Brooklyn in 1920. That's when her father was hired by the International News Services. He was known as their star reporter. Dorothy spent 2 semesters at the College of New Rochelle before she dropped out to take a job as a reporter for the but she was at heart a serious reporter and investigator. She wrote several front-page articles on the Sam Shepard trial. Sam Shepard could be a whole video in and of itself. He was the doctor accused of murdering his family, and he inspired the TV show and the movie called The Fugitive. But she wrote that she was astounded by the guilty verdict against Sam Shepard because she pointed out several flaws in the prosecution's case. Sam Shepard, as I mentioned, it could be an entire video, and maybe it will be soon. But long story short, Dorothy had acquired information on that case that famed defense attorney F. Bailey, who was one of O.J. Simpson's attorneys, that F. Bailey had used that helped play a role in getting Shepard eventually retried and acquitted. So again, she has a talent for a nose for news and following leads and pursuing a story with dogged determination. And she's not afraid to do it. For that time period, that was especially unusual. So now, on to the Kennedy assassination. Quick synopsis, if you aren't familiar. John F. Kennedy, or JFK, was the U.S. president from January 1961 until he was assassinated on November 22nd, 1963. He was shot and killed in Dallas, Texas on November 22nd, 63 while riding in a motorcade. The Kennedy assassination, of course, has inspired books upon books and articles and movies, podcasts, all sorts of conspiracy theories. There's a rabbit She also obtained a copy of Ruby's 1964 testimony to the Warren Commission. Sorry about that. She also obtained a copy of Ruby's 1964 testimony to the Warren Commission, and she published that in 3 installments in her column. These stories ran on front pages in several newspapers, including the Seattle Post-Intelligence and the Philadelphia Inquirer. So, word got around. In one of her columns, Dorothy described meeting Jack Ruby. She said, quote, "Jack Ruby's eyes were as shiny brown and white as the glass of a doll. He tried to smile, but his smile was a failure. When we shook hands, his hand trembled in mine ever so slightly, like the heartbeat of a bird." End quote. He's a gifted wordsmith, really. It's descriptive writing. So, Dorothy found Ruby's trial problematic. She was surprised that the defense was using an insanity plea when he didn't seem insane at all. Just scared. She felt his defense attorney didn't fight hard enough for him, and that was the reason he was eventually sentenced to death. So Ruby's trial left her even more convinced that there was a deeper plot to kill Kennedy. In her March 20th, 1965 column, she wrote, quote, "The point to be remembered in this historic case is that while the truth has not been told, neither the state of Texas nor the defense put on all of its evidence before the jury. Perhaps it was not necessary, but it would have been desirable from the viewpoint of the American people." End quote. So she's a journalist who is really a journalist. She's not some hack somebody's not telling her what angle to pursue and to only find things that confirm that viewpoint. She genuinely, according to anyone who worked with her, everyone said she was dogged in her pursuit of the real story. Her only agenda was to find out what really happened in anything she pursued. So, Dorothy continues her own investigation into the assassination, including traveling to Dallas and to New Orleans to chase down leads. By the fall of 1965, she felt she was on the verge of a major break in the investigation. She had planned another trip to New Orleans where she intended to meet an unnamed source in what she described as a very cloak and daggerish encounter. That was according to Mark Shaw. Mark Shaw wrote a book called The Reporter Who Knew Too Much. He's a former criminal defense attorney, and the link that will be in the description will be to a lecture he gave. So, Dorothy wrote then on September 3rd, 1965, that, quote, "This story is not going to die as long as there's a real reporter alive, and there are a lot of them," end quote. But tragically, about 2 months later, on November 8th, 1965, Dorothy was found dead in her Manhattan townhouse on East 68th Street. Dorothy had appeared on a What's My Line episode that night, and then it's thought she might have gone out to a nightclub with someone, met someone, and then came home and ended up dead. She was found by her hairdresser the next morning. She was found sitting up in bed, wearing a blue bathrobe with like a bolero vest over the bathrobe, false eyelashes, and a floral hair accessory that she had worn on TV that night. She was also propped up in bed, and next to her was, or on her was a book that she was propped up as if she was reading it. It was a book that friends say she had already read, and her glasses were not in the room, and friends say she absolutely needed her glasses in order to read. So it looks like a staged scene. Interestingly, she was found dead in a bedroom that she had never slept in, really, not for years. She was sleeping in clothes she never wore to bed, and the air conditioning was on in the bedroom, even though it was November in New York. And all of her notes relating to her investigation into the Kennedy assassination were missing, and they haven't been found. The cause of death was ruled an overdose of alcohol and barbiturates, and a police investigation claimed no evidence of violence or suicide. Mark Shaw, the lawyer who wrote The Reporter Who Knew Too Much, filed under the Freedom of Information Act, and it was determined through that filing that there was stuff left out of the autopsy report, out of the official autopsy report. It was determined that 2 additional barbiturates had been found in her system, and that there was a powder residue in her glass, in the glass by her bed, suggesting that someone had broken up capsules. There are some similarities between Dorothy's death and that of Marilyn Monroe's. If you don't know, Marilyn Monroe was an actress who was supposedly having an affair with the Kennedys, Jack Kennedy, the president, and Bobby Kennedy, his brother, who was the attorney general. The theory is that Marilyn Monroe was killed because she knew too much too. So, another rabbit hole in this multi-layered universe. So, Shaw believes that Dorothy had been close to revealing evidence that a New Orleans mobster had orchestrated Kennedy's killing. Shaw theorized that Jack Ruby, had told Dorothy that a New Orleans mob boss had contracted crazy piss she was giving. She was about to get so much attention as a dogged reporter, a serious reporter. Was that an affront to his masculinity in the 50s and the 60s? There's been some talk of that. At Dorothy's funeral, her mother supposedly screamed at her husband that she thought he did it to her. So, was it something more domestic related? I don't know. It just seems odd, according to everything that I've read, that someone who is such a dedicated journalist on the brink of breaking the story of the century would die by suicide. Maybe it was an accident too. I don't know. Again, you can do a lot of research on this on your own, watch a lot of videos. It's fascinating, guys. I've really went down a rabbit hole with this lately, and it is so interesting. Let me see what else. Oh, Mark Shaw said in the lecture that I watched on YouTube that he reached out to her children, her now three adult children, who are now in their 80s and 60s, and they won't cooperate. And he theorizes that maybe they think their father did it. And again, no proof of that, no solid proof of that. But he wonders if maybe they think their father did it and they just don't want to deal with that publicly. Their father, Richard Colmar, ended up dying by suicide in 1971, about 6 years after Dorothy passed away. And also Mark Shaw said something interesting. He said that he reached out to Dorothy's second cousins, and this is again more than 50 years after her death, and they would only talk through some other source. They didn't